Hello and welcome to the Daily Brief Show by Zerodha. On this show, we cut through the noise and simplify the biggest stories and trends that are shaping the markets. I'm your host Anurag Bansal. Today is Wednesday, the 4th of September, and I have four big stories for you. In the first story today, I'll talk about the Indian consumption story. In the second one, I'll talk about what is happening with sugar stocks. In the third story, I'll talk about the good times ahead for the hospitality segment. And in the fourth one, I'll talk about Daikin's big plans for India. So let's begin with the first story where I talk about consumption in India. Look, the government recently released the economic data for the first quarter of this financial year, and there are some very interesting trends. Real GDP growth came in at 6.7%, which was much less than the RBI forecast of 7.1%. The GDP growth in the preceding quarter was about 7.8%. Now, of course, the reason for this was elections and heat waves, which we have spoken about quite a bit in the previous episodes. Both of these factors had a disruptive effect on economic activity, ranging from construction, agriculture to consumption. Look, private final consumption expenditure is just a fancy word of talking about the money that households spends on goods and services for their own use. This gives you a sense of consumer confidence and if consumption is strong. Gross fixed capital formation refers to the investment in physical assets like building, machinery, and infrastructure that businesses and governments make. This tells you whether businesses are confident enough to invest in their businesses. Now, with that context out of the way, let me explain what is exactly happening. I'll start with private consumption first. Look, private consumption is about 60% of our GDP. This means if households are not spending, it will have a huge effect on GDP growth. Now, since the financial year 2020, consumption growth has been very weak if you exclude the COVID drop and the recovery. This is because COVID was a very huge shock that affected not just incomes but also spending patterns. In fact, it is not even clear yet if people have psychologically recovered from the massive COVID shock. Now, this was followed by the massive inflationary shock, especially food inflation, which further affected household spending. This is because now most of the money was going towards things like fuel, energy, and food because prices were so high. Then there were also higher EMIs because interest rates went up. Now, if that was not bad enough, the rural economy was hit with poor monsoons and brutal heat waves, which further complicated things. So the last 3 to 4 years, so to speak, have been a case of when it rains, it pours. Now, you might be wondering, if households were in such a bad shape and not spending, how is the Indian economy even growing at 7 to 8%? Look, that is because over the last couple of years or so, the government has been making significant investments, and this has largely been responsible for good GDP numbers we have seen. But the previous quarter that we saw coincided with the elections, so there was almost no government spending. This means private consumption and private investments had to do the heavy lifting all by themselves. I'll get to private investments later, but in the last quarter, private consumption grew by 7.4%, which is the highest in the last 7 quarters. Now, this is good news because it is not possible to achieve durable economic growth if households are not spending. The government cannot continue spending forever and juicing up our GDP numbers. So this begs the question, will consumption growth remain strong? Well, the good news is that there are signs that the rural economy is now doing well. Two-wheeler and tractor sales, which are often used as leading indicator of rural demand, have been doing very well as compared to passenger vehicles. Also, people enrolling in the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee or Manrega scheme have been falling consistently. The other positive is that monsoons have been really good and sowing has been good so far as well. Also, in the recently concluded results season, pretty much all FMCG companies were upbeat about rural demand. Food inflation also seems to be under control, and RBI is bound to start cutting rates in the next couple of meetings. But the bad news here is that urban consumption seems to be falling. So the question is, if one falls and the other goes up, will the effects more or less cancel each other out? The other big factor is that the global economy is also now slowing down, which is a further headwind for the Indian economy. We are already seeing the sharp fall in the growth of China, which is a big engine of global growth. US is also expected to slow down. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'll get to the gross fixed capital formation or investment growth, which is an indicator of whether businesses are feeling confident and making new investments. This number grew at a great rate of about 7.5% in Q1 as compared to 6.5% in the previous quarter. This is despite the fact that there were elections and heat waves. This means private companies seem to be confident into investing in India. Now, if you remember, in some of our previous episodes, I had also spoken about how investment growth had also been a problem. Indian companies were simply not investing enough, but it looks like that is turning a corner now. So now the question is, will India be able to grow at 7%? The odds seem to be stacked against India, but it's not quite impossible. There were some green signals in Q1, but the question is whether it was just a one-off quarter or the start of a larger trend. Moving on to the next story, let's talk about sugar stocks. Look, the Indian government recently said that they are lifting the restriction on sugar mills producing ethanol from sugarcane and paddy. Now, this is big news because India is the world's second largest sugar producer, and this announcement is certain to have some ripple effects on India's demand for crude. But wait, what is ethanol and why does it matter in the first place? Let me break it down for you. Ethanol is a clear, colorless liquid that is commonly used as a solvent fuel and a type of alcohol which is found in alcoholic beverages as well. It is produced by the fermentation of sugars by yeast or by petrochemical processes. Now, ethanol is widely used in various industrial applications from manufacturing pharmaceuticals to being a key ingredient in alcoholic beverages as well. In the fuel industry, ethanol is blended with gasoline to increase octane levels and improve emissions. This makes it an important biofuel. Now, ethanol matters in this case because the world is currently trying to transition away from fossil fuels. That is why ethanol is blended with things like petrol, gasoline, etc. But here is where things get interesting. Before this change, ethanol was a byproduct of sugar production. This was an inefficient process to say the least. With these new rules, sugar mills can take a shortcut now. They can skip sugar production and turn that cane juice directly into ethanol. And this is a big deal for a few reasons. First, for sugar mills, it is potentially more profitable. They can choose whether to make sugar or ethanol based on what is paying better at that particular time. Second, for the global sugar market, if India is making more ethanol, they're exporting less sugar. This could drive up sugar prices worldwide. This is already the case, by the way. The government has currently banned sugar exports. Next, for India's ethanol program, it is a major boost. Look, the government wants 20% of gasoline to be ethanol by 2025-2026, and this change makes that goal a lot more achievable now. India achieved 10% ethanol blending in 2022, and we are already ahead of schedule. Next, for farmers, more demand for sugarcane could mean more stable incomes. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't they do this before? Well, it's not that simple. Just a year ago in 2023, India was actually tightening restrictions on using sugarcane for ethanol. Why though? Look, a bunch of reasons again. First, heat waves were really disrupting sugarcane production considering it is a water-intensive crop. Second, some disease called red rot was hitting the crops in Uttar Pradesh, which is India's largest sugar producing state. Next, the global sugar market was very tight because of the exact same reason as I mentioned above. Also, the government was worried about the trade-off between sugar for consumption and sugar for fuel. So, they restricted ethanol production. But now in 2024, things have changed quite a bit. The government has decided to go restart the ethanol blending program. This whole thing is part of a much bigger plan, by the way. India has been working on blending ethanol into petrol since way back in 2003. It is called the Ethanol Blended Petrol or EBP program. At first, it was moving pretty slow, but in the recent years, it has really stepped on the gas. Right now, we're blending about 13 to 15% ethanol into petrol, but we want to bump that up to 20% in the future. And there are a few reasons for this. First, reducing our oil bills. Look, India imports more than 80% oil and ethanol helps reduce that dependency quite heavily. Second is helping farmers. More demand for sugarcane means more money in the pockets of farmers. Third is going greener. Ethanol is cleaner than pure gasoline, so it can help cut down on carbon emissions. Now, of course, some people have concerns. Food versus fuel is one of them. Some people are worried that using more sugarcane for fuel might lead to sugar shortages or price hikes as well. Second is water worries. Sugarcane takes a lot of water to produce, like I already mentioned before. In a country that is already dealing with severe water scarcity, that is a real concern to have. Apart from that, critics also say that India should focus more on second and third generation biofuels, which are the ones made from waste or non-food crops, instead of using food crops for fuel. So there you have it. It is a simple policy change that could ripple through global markets, change farming practices, and impact energy use. This is already affecting sugar stocks, which have had a crazy run up in the last 3 months or so, while on the other hand, alcohol stocks have been subdued because of questions over ethanol's availability. This, of course, is a very bold move by India, which includes balancing economic, environmental, and societal factors. Will it pay off or not? Only time will tell. Moving on to the third story, let's talk about good times ahead for the hotels and the hospitality sector. Look, the big fat Indian wedding season is approaching soon, and so is the season of festivals. One industry that is probably going to benefit the most from this season is the hotels and hospitality industry. This is because hotels host multiple weddings and also see a huge surge in demand around this time period due to festival related holidays. Now, given that we are now heading into the festival season and the wedding season, I thought it would be a great idea to give you an overview of the Indian hospitality industry. For starters, the Indian hospitality industry is currently valued at about 82,000 crore rupees and it's growing at over 10% every year. For your reference, India has 80 lakh to 1 crore weddings a year and it is worth about 130 billion US dollars. But what is interesting here is that the current demand for hotel rooms is growing at a much faster speed than what supply is. To put this into some perspective, the demand is growing at about 10.8% CAGR, while the supply is growing at only about 8%. This demand supply gap is allowing hotels to charge a much higher premium, which is also improving their profitability. Now, even if you ignore the COVID period dip, the average hotel room rates in India have increased about 12% from pre COVID highs. But average room rates alone do not tell you the whole story. For hotels, occupancy is equally as important. Take the example of a hotel with about 100 rooms. If this hotel is only able to sell 40 rooms in a given day, the remaining 60 rooms unsold are practically useless for them. This is why the industry uses another metric called RevPAR or revenue per available room. This considers both the average room rate as well as the occupancy rates. The good news for the hotels and hospitality industry is that this number is also growing quite significantly. In addition to this, India's aspirational middle class and their incomes is also growing. There has also been a growing trend of premiumization, as we've spoken about in many of our previous episodes, and therefore these people are more willing to spend on luxury and comfort. Hotels usually are the easiest expression of luxury and comfort, and hospitality chains are cashing on this opportunity now. They are selling add-on services such as food and beverage, salons, spas, fitness classes, bicycle rentals, etc. to their customers. According to a report by Access Securities, hotel food and beverage revenue is growing by almost 20% year over year. Now, this growth is driven by restaurants located within hotel premises as well as the food that these hotels offer in banquet halls during events. Apart from this, MICE, which is short for Meetings, Incentives, Conferences and Exhibitions, is also a great growth driver for the hotel industry. According to the same Access report I referred to earlier, MICE currently contributes to about 20% of the hotel industry's incremental growth. Other growth drivers are domestic travelers who contribute about 50% and foreign tourists who contribute about 30% to the industry's incremental growth. Hotels today are also betting very heavily on the country's $130 billion wedding market. The wedding demand in India is so high and the opportunity is so large that every year weddings book rooms worth over 5,000 crore rupees in hotels. Some popular hotel chains have also started to develop marketing materials to make themselves synonymous with weddings. Hyatt runs a campaign called Perfectly Yours, Marriott does it under the name of Shadi by Marriott Bonvoy, and Taj calls it Timeless Weddings. In Q1 this year, the entire sector witnessed a very sluggish start to the financial year. India's hotel industry's revenue per room grew by just 4 to 5% year on year during this time. This was largely because of multiple headwinds like general elections, heat waves, and lesser number of wedding days. But considering all those headwinds have now kind of vanished, the industry seems to be ready for a strong couple of quarters going forward. Moving to the fourth and the final story for the day, I'll talk about how Daikin is betting very heavily in the Indian AC market. Look, India is heating up, and I'm not just talking about the weather. As temperatures rise and heat waves attack the Indian population, air conditioners are slowly turning from a luxury to a necessity. According to Volta's annual report, the room AC market or RAC market is expected to grow at a CAGR of 12% and it will reach 50,000 crore rupees by 2028-2029. One company that is eyeing this growth opportunity in India is Daikin, which is, by the way, the world's largest AC manufacturer. The company recently announced its plans to set up a massive 33-acre plot in Sri City of Andhra Pradesh. This will be their third manufacturing unit in India and they will focus on producing compressor units for ACs. Their larger plan in India is to manufacture 5 million AC units by 2030, which includes 4 million for the domestic market itself. But in case you're wondering here why India is all of a sudden such a hot market for AC makers, I'll take a moment to explain why this is the case. First and the most obvious one is that we are sweating. Like I said earlier, rising temperatures and brutal heat waves are turning ACs from a luxury product to a necessity. This is heavily increasing the demand for ACs. Second, the market is barely tapped. According to Kanwaljit Java, who's Daikin's India CEO, about 93% of India still does not own air conditioners. Given that there is a rising class of aspirational Indians with disposable incomes, this is a big opportunity to tap into. Now, if you're wondering how many of those 93% will actually buy ACs, the third point is for you. The market is full of first time buyers. The MD of Blue Star, which is another prominent AC manufacturer, said that about 95% of the AC market is currently comprised of first time buyers. What is even more interesting here is that 65% of these buyers are located in tier 3, 4, and 5 cities of the country. Fourth, we have got a lot of room to grow. India's power consumption for cooling per person is about 25% of global averages. So, for example, if the average person in the world uses 100 units of energy for cooling, a person in India uses only 25 units. So, we clearly have a long way to go as a nation. Now, back to Daikin, they're not just excited about India's population and market potential, they are also very hopeful of getting a big boost from India's production linked incentive or PLI scheme. Let me explain. See, until 2020, ACs were primarily imported into India. Foreign manufacturers met approximately 30% of India's demand for fully assembled units and critical components. As a result of this, domestic players were only about 15 to 20% of the Indian AC market. So, to make things better, in 2020, India banned the import of ACs with refrigerants in order to encourage domestic players. Now, this obviously was a major blow for foreign manufacturers, but it was not enough to solve the problem. See, even though domestic manufacturers had an open opportunity, they did not have the capability to meet the demand. So, in April 2021, the government introduced the PLI scheme to solve for it. Under this scheme, selected manufacturers would receive a 4 to 6% refund on the additional sales they made compared to the previous year. And this was subject to some specific conditions that we'll not get into. Now, this seems to be working. In just 18 months, the domestic value addition in the AC industry shot up from about 25% to 45%. But coming back to Daikin, the world's largest AC manufacturer is one of the 13 foreign-owned companies that committed investments under the PLI scheme for ACs and LED lights. This makes them eligible to take advantage of this scheme and grow even faster in the country. So broadly speaking, it is safe to say that India's AC market is heating up faster than ever right now. Both local and foreign players are fighting to cash in on this opportunity, which by the looks of it seems no less than a gold mine. It'll be very interesting to track this space over the next few months, and I'll be sure to cover this space as and when there are more developments. That's all the news and stories I have for you today. I hope you found this episode interesting and valuable. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.